What's up? Welcome to another episode of Theological Sidebars. Glad you guys are with me today. Today is going to be an interesting topic. It's connected to a passage that we went through on Sunday at the church, and it comes out of the book of Titus. But there are some questions that arose, and I think it's important to address this here. The idea of gender roles that we find in the church. So, here's the passage, and then let's talk about it together. So, passages here for the older women, it says, verse 3, Titus chapter 2, they're to teach what is good so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be self-controlled, pure, workers at home, kind, and in submission to their husbands, so that so God's word will not be slandered. So that's the topic, the passage of what does this actually look like? What does this actually mean? Now, some will say, "Hey, look, you read this passage and understand that no, this is not what it means." It's that they'll say there's maybe culturally it's bound, and so that no, this is not something for the church today. That we really don't have to worry about. Women don't need to have to worry about submission to husbands, even this idea that he says that they're to be workers at home, that those are outdated. Those are for this congregation. But I want to push back on that idea. And I kind of want to talk about two things. I want to talk about, first off, is there such a thing as gender roles? So before we take on this passage, let's just go down this road for a second. Yeah, I would say that many in the church, if you're in a maybe a Bible teaching church, have already begun to think through the issue, because it's been thrown in our direction now of what is our stance on something like the transgender movement. And so you've had to kind of wrestle with this question, right? Of what does it mean what does it mean for us, right? So can somebody, is gender fluid, all right? So people might say something like, does it really matter if a man wants to, say that he is a woman? And does it matter if a woman says that she is a man? Is there a difference in that? And so if you're in a Bible kind of believing church, teaching church, we would say, yes, it matters, right? That you don't just change that. We would push back on that and say that we need to accept how God made us. We would look at a passage like this, right, in Genesis, where it says, so God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. And so as a result, we would say, right, that we need to embrace the fact that God has made humans in his own image, and he created us man and woman, right? That would be that's kind of the big part of this, is that God has designed humanity to be binary, right? That there is one man, there is one woman, he created it, and that is the pattern of everything else. So the question then comes, right? If we accept that, and we accept that, yes, God created men and women, and we are to affirm that as a church, then the next question we should want to ask then is this pattern, right, found in creation and how he created us as humans, does it matter more than simply the creation mandate, right? So let me give an example of what I'm talking about here. So if we go to the passage and we look at what does he say to Adam and Eve after it says God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. So in that passage, right, does it matter? And I don't know if we think through this, maybe some might want to say, well, really, the male and female is just that we need to be in relationship, and that male and female you need in order to do those things of to be fruitful and to multiply. And so, but I do think that God has created us for more than just that. So think about this. If you skip over to chapter 2, it says, then the Lord God said, this is chapter 2, verse 18 in Genesis, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper corresponding to him, right? So this is understandable, that in the creative order, as man is commanded to be fruitful, to multiply, to go and to subdue the earth, to rule it on behalf of the Lord, not only do you need men and women to fulfill their sexual roles and their family roles, in the sense of one has to bear the children, the other is going to bring the seed. You also begin to see as well is that there's a relationship that is developed here in chapter 2, that there is the helper, and as they go together, right, to rule, to as they bear the image of God, right, that she is going to be his helper to do that job. So he's created a team to fulfill this together. So that's something that's important for us to realize, is that God has created in the creative order before the fall even. He creates man and he creates woman, and woman is to be the helper as the two go together to subdue the creation, to fill it, and recognize that they're both created in the image of God. So once again, we already see rooted in the first 2 chapters that both men and women have equal value before God. Both men and women bear the image of God. However, it appears that there is a role difference to play. Even looking at, once you get to the curse post-fall, there's roles that then obviously will play out as a result. But this is something I think it's important to kind of wrestle with, right? Is that did God create us with different roles? Are men and women meant to have a different role to play? And so I would say absolutely yes. We see that in the creative order as well. So yeah, I mean, that's the first piece that I would say as we deal with this. We should affirm as a church that our sexual distinctions are much deeper than just simply one has male parts and one has female parts, and we need to accept that. But know that God has also given us a role to play. Now, here's one more that I will throw out that I think you should look at. It looks at 1 Timothy chapter 2. Now, Paul's talking about how order is in the church and what it should mean to not only should there be a role to play in the home, but there's a role to play in the church. But this is the part that I want to look at, because we can do it at another time, and we have dealt with this passage in some of our podcasts with OTXNT on the idea of women preaching in the church. But here is the passage I think that's important to look at. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. But Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and transgressed. But she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, holiness with good sense. The point being, right, is Paul is making the case that there was something to the creative order, right? That we're going back pre-fall, we're going to the creative order, that God's design in creating man first has implications even for headship in the church and in the home, right? So those are major pieces that we don't think about in church, that we have to really wrestle with. Why do we have men and women? But it comes down to design, not only for design to just, be fruitful and fill the earth, but design for the family, of how God has ordered the family, how God has ordered the church. Now, here's the next thing that I want to look at. So if we go to that Titus passage, we need to look at this piece, because this is something that people don't think about today too, is this idea, right, to be submissive to their husband. So let me just point out something here. It's important to recognize. Notice in this passage, and in submission to their husbands. First off, we need to affirm what the Bible is teaching is not that women all submit to men. We don't have a male-dominated submission that is taught here. No, it's very clear that one woman submits to her husband. So that's the first piece here. Now, this idea of submission is not culturally bound. Let me give you some examples as we think about what submission should be. So Titus says this. Let's also look at, of course, let me go to Peter first, because that's an important passage to look at as well. Let me go to Peter, and what are we going to see right here? First Peter chapter 3, and notice what he says. In the same way, wives, submit to your own husbands. Once again, it's the role of a Christian wife to submit to her own husband, not anybody else's, not any other people. Relationship in the marriage is between one woman and one man in that world. So he is to be the head and she is not accountable to any other man, to her husband. She is, though. And it says, so that even if some of them disobey the word, they may be won over without a word. And by the way, they live their lives. When they observe your pure, reverent lives, don't let your beauty consist of outward things like elaborate hairstyles, wearing gold, fine jewelry, or fine clothes, but rather what is inside the heart, the imperishable quality of a gentle, quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For in the past, holy women who put their hope in God also adorned themselves in this way, submitting to their own husbands. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, you have become her children when you do what is good and do not fear any intimidation. Husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way. You're like, okay, so let me stop here and just recognize the point is this, is Peter affirms this idea of submission. Notice in here, this idea of submission is not whatever he says, you've got to bow, make sure you do. No, like obviously there's a passage in here where you might have a husband who is doing the wrong things. And you have somebody here who is she's going to yield to her husband, but she's going to, the point is that she will still win him over in her commitment to Christ. So there are obviously limitations to what this idea of submission means. It's not this overall just domineering. And by the way, that's not what this is about, right? That there's no way to, if you're looking at how the Bible teaches on submission, you need to really go to the big one, which is the idea that comes in Ephesians, and talk about what this should look like. So it says, right, that, and let's just go back a little bit. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so wives are to submit to their husbands in everything. Now, once again, remember, that is not an everything in the sense of anything and everything. Like there is this idea that we balance of what does the wife, need to do? How does she win her husband over in godliness? But here's the other part of this too, is right that this is insinuating, this is heavily implying that the husband is going to be Christ-like. So as the wife, she should not fear in a Christian marriage because the husband should be patterning his walk after Christ. So it should be something that she can easily trust because he is to do exactly what Christ has asked of him, right? So the husband is to be the head of the wife. Christ is the head of the church. He is to model Christ, right? Now, as the church submits to Christ, so wives are to submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by his word. So husbands need to also be willing to love their wives to the point of, are they going to die? And I think this is important because some men say, well, I'm willing to die for my wife, but are you willing to give up yourself for your wife, right? A lot of times they'll say, well, I'll die for my wife, but I won't give up my golf game, or I won't give up my hobbies and stuff for her. And their wife is burdened at home with everything. And I won't actually die to myself. I won't actually die for her. If it means take a bullet, maybe, but don't ask me to give up my entertainment for her. She can do what she needs to do. That's not the kind of submission and the kind of headship that we see here. So in this passage, we also need to be very clear that submission is her yielding to her husband. And it also means her husband loving her and leading her as well, right? And this also means that even though he might be a lunk sometimes, you submit because you're called to, not because he's doing as good of a job or not, right? That your submission is based on the relationship we see in the church with Christ in the church. So here's another thing. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. No one hates his own flesh, but provides for it and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, since we are members of the body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. To sum it up, each of you is to love his wife as himself, and the wife is to respect her husband. So recognize that this relationship Paul brings out talks about that this is how it should be. And he's going to affirm that. Paul will affirm the idea that submission is there as well. You'll see that in Colossians 3:18, talks about what the role of a husband and a wife should be, and parents, and what that should look like. But here's something I think is important to get to. If the idea of submission is just culturally rooted, then what does that mean for this passage, right? Paul says that this idea of submission and the way a husband and wife should relate to each other should be a pattern of the gospel, right? It should be a pattern of what we see as the church submits to Jesus, right? So what does that mean if we say, well, it's cultural, it's not really anything that we need to worry about anymore. Submission is not something that we should worry about so much. Like, what does that do for the image, right? That if there is no headship, what does that mean for the church and for Christ? What do we portray in our marriage? We're not portraying anything anymore. In fact, we're portraying the equality in that sense. And look, they're equal. Absolutely. We've already dealt with that. But the image is marred if we don't have headship and submission according to the way that God has designed it. Here's another thing I want to think about. If these are culturally rooted, right? If this is just culturally rooted imagery, then why is it perfectly acceptable for Paul to say, you people in your stage, in your time, you must do that? But, and limit them and clamp down, right? If we think of submission as a burdens and freedom and patriarchal oppression, right? If we think of it like that, why is it perfectly legitimate to have patriarchal oppression in the past? And that's okay. Those people needed to have it. But for some reason now, we must be liberated and we don't need to have those things anymore. Like, it's perfectly acceptable for them to say, yeah, they could have had it, but not for us, right? I think there's a problem there. I think our problem should be, how do we deal with this? And look, here's the deal. It's easy for me to sit here and to say, here's how the submission thing should work. But the men need to take notice, right? Is that we got a lot of people who want to play that card, but they're not actually going to lead. If you want a wife to submit, right? Granted, she should be walking with the Lord where she's going to submit because her love for the Lord and her dedication to Him. But you, better man, right? You better be walking with the Lord and reflecting Christ. You better be leading. You don't sit back and let her. You sit back and say, well, let her do the religious stuff. Let her do no. That's you are the spiritual leader. You are accountable as the head of the home for what goes on in terms of the spiritual life of your family. You can't pass that off. Saw what happened in the garden, actually, right? Remember that passage we just read in 1 Timothy? It says Adam was not deceived. You know what Adam did? He passed it off. He sat back and allowed it to happen. And so there is a call here obviously there's a call of how relationships should work. But there's also, and the wife should submit, but I hope you're not hearing me and saying, bang, 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 submission. No, I'm talking about men, lead. Love, like Christ would. Don't just sit back and say, let her handle things, right? She is the administrator of the home. That's what the scriptures teach. But, right, you're the spiritual leader of the home. You're to walk this and flesh this out and to live this out. So here's the question then next that I know inevitably will come is, okay, what if you're not married? How should this work? So first off, once again, if you're a single woman, you do not just submit to any man. And if you're a single man, you can't demand any woman submit to you. Okay? Now granted, Paul will talk about relationships of, slave to master, to authorities. That's a different type of submission. We're talking about relational, of what it should look like. But I will say, it is important to kind of think through what does he say about marriage and singleness. And so here's what I would just say for us, that if we want to really kind of dive into this passage, let me open up. Okay, here we go. Let me show you what Paul says about submission. I want to tell you, this is why I think that, for you, you're not bound by anything. Now, I would say that if you're connected to your family, seek the wisdom of your family. If you're under their roof, submit to the family, your parents in this. But notice what Paul says. He makes an issue about singleness. I want you to be without concerns. The unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord and how he may please the Lord. But the married man is concerned about the things of the world and how he may please his wife. And his interests are divided. The unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord so that she may be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is concerned about the things of the world and how she may please her husband. I'm saying this for your own benefit, not to put a restraint on you, but promote what is proper, and so that you may be devoted to the Lord without distraction. So this is important, because what it's saying is when you get married, that there now is this relationship of now having to kind of lead and to submit and to please each other and to love each other, and your interests now become divided. You can't just do all the things you could do when you're single. That's the point that Paul's making. When you're single, you can be completely devoted into the Lord. Like your submission is only to God in that sense, right? But once you get married, there is a difference of how this role is to work. And so that's what he goes on, and he says, he goes a little bit further, and he talks about that it's not sinning to want to get married, right? But yeah, if you don't want to get, and actually, if you read 1 Corinthians 7:36 there and 37 and 38, there might be there might be some issue of who are we talking about there? That's another one about, is it the father who's talking about releasing his daughter for marriage, or the man who's has a fiance and he's not sure what he wants to do, if he really wants to get married or not. But as we think through these things, recognize that the point about singleness, right, is that if you're single, you are completely submissive really only to Christ, and you are not, you're not kind of worried about the things of that come from being in a marriage relationship, that kind of issues that present themselves. So lastly, though, I want to say that it should be something that, that we should not fear submission. We should not fear leadership in the home. Men, women, you should not fear the submit. Like, this is what God has designed for us. And we get it right. It's a beautiful picture to the world of how the gospel works. When you have these things open up, conversations open up, you can present that to people of why the relationship works this way. When you are struggling because you're having a battle for that, to be able to recognize the weight that's on your shoulder, men, to lead and to love, even though you may not feel like it, or maybe you're frustrated, right? Is to really, am I acting like Christ, right? And for the women, as they submit, right, and they are in this relationship, they have the ability to say, even though I may not want to, or I'm not happy with how this is going, or he's not leading, like all of that stuff that comes. There's a picture of what does it look like, though, to be the church, and that you can share with that. These are, like I said, these are not culturally rooted. These are gospel-rooted images that are perfect. They're great for a gospel conversation. They're a beautiful picture of the gospel to others. That being said, there's been so many that don't do this right, and they mar the image, right? They don't do this right, and they create submission to be something domineering, dominating, and for some that they refuse to yield, that becomes very nasty. But just because it's been tainted and marred doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. Okay, I think that's it for now. I hope this was helpful. I just thought there'd be some extra thoughts on this. I just think that it's that we need a little bit of that conversation. Once again, this is not one of those things that it's easy to necessarily talk through. It's not something that's simple to work through, but it is something that I think is clear that God has roles and assigned in the marriage and how it should work. It should be in the family and how it should work too. And I'll just say this, that it's the husband and the wife that lead the family. The husband leads the wife. The husband and wife lead the children. She is the administrator of the home, as she is called, and both of them can work together. They complement each other to take on the ministry that God has given the husband and the wife together. Okay, that's all I got for now. I appreciate you listening. If this was helpful, great. And if not, send me some questions. I'd love to try to address those if I get a chance to. All right, take care. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.